This screencast is twofold. First, I'm going to get all readers set up for what they're going to do while they read. Then, I'm going to read the story aloud. The name of the story is The Horse Snake by Win Kwang Yang. While you read, you're going to do text analysis, and you're looking for setting in nonfiction. Now, most nonfiction, the setting isn't that important if it's an informational book. But in this case, you're reading a memoir, which is a lot like an autobiography. Like all authors of memoirs, Win writes about actual events in his life. Since these events actually happened to him, Win provides real details about the setting. These details help you visualize the small village where he grew up. As you read, look for images and details that help you experience life in the Vietnamese countryside. Then, think about how the setting affects the villagers and their conflict with the snake. Well, there's some important info in here. Number one, story takes place in Vietnam, and it's in the countryside. Also, the conflict is with the snake. Already, I know the setting's important because you probably wouldn't have a conflict with a snake if it took place in a city. Notice that this piece of literary nonfiction shares many of the features you have studied in this unit, including plot, characters, and setting. This is a pretty tight story. And it definitely has a plot. It has an exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and a resolution. It's got characters that you become familiar with their personalities. It also has a setting which is very vivid, and if it didn't take place in this particular setting, the story wouldn't really have happened. So the setting is crucial to the story. In order to record information about the setting, you're going to use this Google Doc. You can find it on Classroom. It's called While You Read Text Analysis, and it's on setting and nonfiction. I repeat, a memoir is about real events in an author's life. The setting in a memoir is like the setting in fiction. It includes details about time and place that help the reader picture the scene. I hope that when you're done reading the story, you have a vivid picture in your mind of what the village looks like. Directions. In the chart below, record details from the memoir that describe the locations, times during the day, and surroundings. So, in this chart, you have locations, time of day, and surroundings or environment. When you're thinking of that, think of what would you see, what would you hear, or what would you feel if you were dropped into the story. Now, the first one, I give you the location. So between lines 15 and 25, it's a small farm village or hamlet on the edge of the Vietnamese jungle. What time of day is it between lines 15 and 25? And what are the surroundings like? What would you hear? What would you see? What would you feel? You're going to do the same thing for lines 16 to 33 and lines 46 to 51. You need to stop at those places, reread the lines, determine the location, the time of day, and the surroundings. So, you got to keep this handy and close because you're going to need to come back to it in order to record it. If you are going to read on your own, this story starts on page 128 in the literature textbook, and it goes to page 134. So, if you are reading on your own, you can stop. I am going to start reading aloud now. The Horse Snake by Win Kwang Yang. I'm going to keep the cursor here on the side and go down the lines that I'm reading. Your job is to follow along word by word. By doing so, you will remember the details. So don't just simply listen. Make sure your eyes are following the words. Despite all his courage, there was one creature in the jungle that Tank always tried to avoid, the snake. And there was one kind of snake that was more dangerous than other snakes, the horse snake. In some areas, people called it the bamboo snake because it was as long as a full-grown bamboo tree. In other regions, the people called it the thunder or lightning snake because it attacked so fast and with such power that its victims had neither time to escape nor strength to fight it. In our area, we called it the horse snake because it could move as fast as a thoroughbred. Image of the horse snake. and it's kind of superimposed over an image of Tank's village, or Wynn's village. One night, a frightened friend of our families banged on our door and asked us to let him in. When crossing the rice field in front of our house on his way home from a wedding, he had heard the unmistakable hiss of a horse snake. We became very worried, not only for us and our friend, but also for the cattle and other animals we raised. It was too far into the night to rouse all our neighbors and go to search for the snake, but my father told my cousin to blow 3 times on his buffalo horn, the signal that a dangerous wild beast was loose in the hamlet. A few seconds later, we heard 3 long quivering sounds of the horn at the far end of the hamlet, answering our warning. We presumed that the whole hamlet was now on guard. I'm going to stop for a second. Reread lines 15 to 20. What do the night sounds reveal about the setting? So 15 is here. It was too far into the night to rouse all our neighbors and go to search for the snake, but my father told my cousin to blow 3 times on his buffalo horn, the signal that a dangerous wild beast was loose in the hamlet. A few seconds later, we heard 3 long quivering sounds of a horn at the far end of the hamlet, answering our warning. We presumed that the whole hamlet was now on guard. Well, what it reveals about the setting is that it's a small village, because you can hear from one end to the other the blow of a buffalo horn. I stayed up that night listening to all the sounds outside, while my father and my cousin sharpened their hunting knives. Shortly after midnight, we were startled by the frightened neighing of a horse in the rice field. Then the night was still, except for a few sad calls of nocturnal birds and the occasional roaring of tigers in the jungle. It's now that I'm going to stop reading, and I'm going to go to my Google Doc, because I've reached line 25. And after reading that, it's a small farm village or hamlet on the edge of the Vietnamese jungle. So I've reread 15 to 25, I've determined that. I also have determined that it took place at night. So that's when this action is taking place. And after rereading it, the sound of the horn is something I hear, sound of animals in the jungle, like the birds and the tiger, and farm animals. There's the neighing of the horse. So, I've completed this top line for you. You can pause now in order to write this down. The next day, early in the morning, all the able-bodied men of the hamlet gathered in front of our house and divided into groups of 4 to go and look for the snake. My father and my cousin grabbed their lunch and joined a searching party. They found the old horse that had neighed the night before in the rice field, and the snake had squeezed it to death. Its chest was smashed and all its ribs broken, but the snake had disappeared. It's here now that I'm going to stop because I've reached line 33. And I'm going to go back to my Google Doc. And now your job now is to pause, reread lines 16 to 33, and then record details about the time of day and the surroundings or environment. Here are lines 16 to 33. You can pause now to write that down. Everybody agreed that it was the work of one of the giant horse snakes which had terrorized our area as far back as anyone could remember. The horse snake usually eats small game such as turkeys, monkeys, chickens, and ducks, but for unknown reasons, sometimes it will attack people and cattle. A fully grown horse snake can reach the size of a king python, but unlike pythons, horse snakes have an extremely poisonous bite. Because of their bone-breaking squeeze and fatal bite, they are one of the most dangerous creatures of the uplands. The men searched all day, but at nightfall they gave up and went home. My father and my cousin looked very tired when they returned. My grandmother told them to go right to bed after their dinner, and she would wake them up if she or my mother heard any unusual sounds. The men went to bed, and the women prepared to stay up all night. My mother sewed torn clothing, and my grandmother read a novel she had just borrowed from a friend. And for the second night in a row, they allowed my little sister and me to stay awake and listen with them for as long as we could. But hours later, seeing the worry on our faces, my grandmother put aside her novel and told us a story. So we've reached line 51. It's here now that you're going to want to reread lines 46 to 51. After you reread it, write down the location, time of day, and the surroundings. And I'll put back up the story so you can see it. So this is lines 46 to 51. Pause here to reread that and record the information. Once upon a time, a happy family lived in a small village on the shore of the South China Sea. They respected the laws of the land and loved their neighbors very much. The father and his oldest son were woodcutters. The father was quite old, but he still could carry home a heavy load of wood. One day on his way home from the jungle, he was happier than usual. He and his son had discovered a wild chicken nest containing 12 eggs. Now he would have something special to give his grandchildren when they pulled his shirt sleeves and danced around him to greet him when he came home. The father looked at the broad shoulders of his son and his steady gait under a very heavy load of wood. He smiled. His son was a good son, and he had no doubt that when he became even older still, his son would take good care of him and his wife. As he was thinking this, he saw his son suddenly throw the load of wood at the charging horse snake that had come out of nowhere. The heavy load of wood crashed into the snake's head and stunned it. That gave them enough time to draw their sharp woodcutting knives. But instead of attacking the horse snake from the front, the elder shouted to his son to run behind the big bush of elephant grass nearby, while he, who was a little too old to run fast, jumped into the front end of the bush. Each time the snake passed by him, the old man managed to hit it with his knife. He struck the snake many times. Finally, it became weak and slowed down, so he came out of his hiding place and attacked the snake's tail, while his son attacked the snake's head. The snake fought back furiously, but finally it succumbed to the well-coordinated attack of father and son. When the snake was dead, they grabbed its tail and proudly dragged it to the edge of their village. Everyone rushed out to see their prize. They all argued over who would have the honor of carrying the snake to their house for them. The old woodcutter and his son had to tell the story how they had killed the snake at least 10 times. But people never tired of hearing it again and again. They all agreed that the old woodcutter and his son were not only brave, but clever as well. Then and there, the villagers decided that when their chief, also a brave and clever man, died, the old woodcutter was the only one who deserved the honor of replacing him. When my grandmother finished the story, my little sister and I became a bit more cheerful. People could defeat this dangerous snake after all. The silent darkness outside became less threatening. Nevertheless, we were still too scared to sleep in our room, so my mother made a makeshift bed in the sitting room, close to her and our grandmother. So, what two details in lines 94 to 99 help you picture the setting? Well, when my grandmother finished the story, my little sister and I became a bit more cheerful. People could defeat the dangerous snake after all. The silent darkness, so it's really silent and it's dark outside, became less threatening. Nevertheless, we were still too scared to sleep in our room, so my grandmother made a makeshift bed in the sitting room, close to her and our grandmother, So the two details are silent darkness outside, so it's deep in the night, and then they're in the sitting room in the house. When we woke up the next morning, life in the hamlet had almost returned to normal. The snake had not struck again that night, and the farmers, in groups of 3 or 4, slowly filtered back to their fields. Then, late in the afternoon, hysterical cries for help were heard in the direction of the western part of the hamlet. My cousin and my father grabbed their knives and rushed off to help. It was Min, a farmer, who was crying for help. Min, like most farmers in the area, stored the fish he had caught in the rice field at the end of the rainy season in a small pond. That day, Min's wife wanted a good fish for dinner. When Min approached his fish pond, he heard what sounded like someone trying to steal his fish by using a bucket to empty water from the pond. Min was very angry and rushed over to catch the thief, but when he reached the pond, what he saw so petrified him that he fell over backwards speechless. When he regained control, he crawled away as fast as he could and yelled loudly for help. The thief he saw was not a person, but a huge horse snake, perhaps the same one that had squeezed the old horse to death 2 nights before. The snake had hooked its head to the branch of one tree and its tail to another, and was splashing the water out of the pond by swinging its body back and forth like a hammock. Thus, when the shallow pond became dry, it planned to swallow the fish. All the villagers rushed to the scene to help Min, and our village chief quickly organized an attack. He ordered all the men to surround the pond. Then 2 strong young men approached the snake, one at its tail and the other at its head, and they crept closer and closer. The snake assumed a striking position, its head about 1 meter above the pond, and its tail swaying from side to side. It was ready to strike in either direction. As the 2 young men moved in closer, the snake watched them. Each man tried to draw the attention of the snake, while the third man crept stealthily to its side. Suddenly, he struck the snake with his long knife. The surprised snake shot out of the pond like an arrow and knocked the young man unconscious as it rushed by. It broke through the circle of men and went into the open rice field, but it received 2 more wounds on its way out. The village chief ordered all the women and children to form a long line between the open rice field and the jungle, and to yell as loudly as they could, hoping to scare the snake so that it would not flee into the jungle. It would be far easier for the men to fight the wounded snake in the open field than to follow it there. But now there was new difficulty. The snake started heading toward the river. Normally, a horse snake could beat any man in a race, but since this was badly wounded, our chief was able to cut off its escape by sending half his men running to the river. Blocked off from the river and jungle, the snake decided to stay and fight. The hunting party surrounded the snake again, and this time 4 of the best men attacked the snake from 4 different directions. The snake fought bravely, but it perished. During the struggle, 1 of the men received a dislocated shoulder, 2 had bruised ribs, and 3 were momentarily blinded by dirt thrown by the snake. Luckily, all of them succeeded in avoiding the fatal bite of the snake. We rejoiced that the danger was over, but we knew it would only be a matter of time until we would once again have to face our most dangerous natural enemy, the horse snake. And this ends the reading. Now that you're done with the reading, you're going to want to make sure that your text analysis is completed, and then you're going to want to open up the after reading questions that are also on Classroom.